When we talk about avoidant personalities, most people assume they're cold, distant, detached, and unwilling to engage emotionally. But the truth is much more complex. An avoidant doesn't lack emotions, they protect them. They built an inner fortress not because they don't feel deeply, but because they feel so deeply that it overwhelms them. And here's the secret most people miss. When an avoidant begins to show emotional consistency with you, that's not casual. That's a breakthrough. That's love in its rawest, most vulnerable form. Think about it. The nature of avoidance is unpredictability. They'll call one day and disappear the next. They'll seem interested, then withdraw. They're trained by life, by experience, by pain, to control the rhythm of connection. It gives them safety. But the moment you notice that rhythm shifting, the moment their pattern of inconsistency starts to stabilize with you, something profound is happening. They're no longer relating to you out of fear. They're relating to you out of care. Now, I want you to hear this. Consistency is not easy for them. For you, a text good morning might feel like nothing, but for them it's a risk. It's a small but radical declaration that says, I'm letting you in. I'm trusting you not to hurt me. When they check in regularly, when they remember something you told them last week and bring it up today, that's not accidental. That's intentional. That's an avoidant dismantling their own protective system because something in you feels safe, something in you feels worth the risk. What makes this even more powerful is the psychology behind it. Avoidants live in a state of heightened self-preservation. Their nervous system is wired to equate intimacy with danger. It's not that they don't want closeness, it's that closeness feels threatening. So, if they are showing up consistently for you, if they are checking on your day, making sure you're okay, keeping track of your needs, they're not doing what's easy. They're doing what terrifies them. And when someone chooses love over fear, when they choose connection over self-protection, you are witnessing transformation at its core. Let's take it even deeper. Love in its highest form is about presence. Not grand gestures, not fireworks, not declarations. Presence, showing up again and again. And for an avoidant, presence is the last gift they would ever give casually. They value their time, their energy, and most of all, their emotional safety. So if they are allocating those scarce resources toward you, it means you've touched them in a way that bypasses logic. You've awakened a need in them stronger than their fear. Some of you right now might be questioning, but what if they're just being nice? What if they're just polite? Let me make it plain. An avoidant doesn't do just nice. They do distant, they do polite distance. They do functional interactions that keep you on the outside. When an avoidant is truly falling in love, they break that pattern and they start moving towards you instead of away from you. Consistency is their love confession, spoken not with words, but with actions repeated over time. Now here's where it gets interesting. If you're the person on the receiving end, you have to learn to recognize this subtle shift. Because if you dismiss it, if you ignore it, you may miss the miracle happening right in front of you. Don't wait for dramatic declarations. Look for the quiet proof, the messages that come without prompting, the little check-ins that seem small but mean everything, the way they're suddenly there when you need them. That's the heartbeat of an avoidant in love. And let's be honest here, you might feel frustrated. You might say, why can't they just say how they feel? Or why can't they express it the way I want them to? But love is not about making someone love you your way. It's about seeing the way they love and choosing to honor it. If their love language is consistency in small acts, then understand that those small acts are massive to them. That is courage. That is intimacy. That is their way of whispering, I love you, without moving their lips. So the next time you see an avoidant breaking their pattern, leaning into consistency, remember what it costs them to do that. Remember that every repeated action is them lowering their defenses, opening their heart, and risking pain, because their connection with you is greater than their fear of loss. And that's the point I want to leave you with. When an avoidant chooses consistency, they're choosing love. Not the easy kind, not the movie scene kind, but the courageous kind, the kind that battles fear every day just to show up for you. If you can recognize that, if you can value that, then you don't just have their attention. You already have their heart. One of the greatest misconceptions people have about avoidance is that they don't care about closeness. People assume that because they guard their independence, they don't crave intimacy. But that's not true. They crave it just as much as anyone else, sometimes even more, but they've been conditioned to believe intimacy is unsafe. So what do? They build walls. They create distance. They convince themselves that they don't need anyone. But when you start to see an avoidant letting you into their private world, when they begin opening up parts of themselves they normally keep locked away, that's not just behavior. That's love in action. That's the avoidant creating a safe space, not just for themselves, but for you. And that's huge because for someone who's spent most of their life protecting their personal territory, to share it with you means they've already decided you belong inside their world. Think about it like this. Every human being has an inner sanctuary. For some, the door is wide open. They invite anyone and everyone in. But for the avoidant, that door is not just locked, it's reinforced, sealed, bolted shut. Very few people, if anyone, are allowed access. If they're suddenly showing you pieces of their world, their routines, their vulnerabilities, their fear, childhood stories, that's not random. That's a deliberate act of trust. Why does this matter? Because safety is the foundation of love. Without safety, love cannot grow. Without safety, intimacy collapses into fear. So when an avoidant decides to share space with you, they are telling you, I feel safe enough to let down my defenses. And safety for them is not easily earned. It's not a casual gift. It's something they give only when they've crossed the threshold from resistance to connection. Let me give you an example. Maybe they've always been secretive about where they go, how they spend their time, or who they spend it with. But now they're inviting you in their daily rhythm. They're calling you after work. They're telling you about the struggles they've faced during the day. They're letting you see them not just in their strength, but in their weakness. That's intimacy. That's love. They're not just sharing information. They're sharing themselves. And here's the beautiful paradox: avoidants are most afraid of losing themselves in relationships. That's their biggest fear, that if they let someone too close, they'll disappear, but they'll lose their independence, they'll get swallowed up. So when they create a safe space for you within their life, they are doing something that feels to them almost revolutionary. But they are proving to themselves that connection doesn't have to mean loss, that intimacy can exist without annihilation, and that proof only comes when love is already present. Philosophically, this is profound. It challenges the avoidant's entire worldview. Imagine living your whole life believing closeness is dangerous, and then finding yourself with someone who makes closeness feel not just safe, but fulfilling. That's not just romance, that's transformation. That's love changing the very fabric of how they see the world. Now, if you're on the receiving end of this, you need to recognize what's really happening. Because too often people misinterpret it. They think, well, finally they're just loosening up. No, it's not about loosening up. It's about them making a conscious choice to let you in. It's about them saying, I trust you more than I fear intimacy. And that is one of the highest forms of love an avoidant can give. It's also important to notice what they share. Avoidants don't waste their vulnerability. If they open up about their past, about mistakes they've made, about hurts they've carried, about regrets they've hidden, that's sacred. That's them placing their heart in your hands and saying, don't break this. If they introduce you to their closest friends or family, that's not just socializing, that's integration. That's them weaving you into the fabric of their life. So don't underestimate these moments. Don't take lightly the act of being invited to their safe space. Because for them, that safe space is everything. It's their shelter, their identity, their protection. And if you're standing in that space, it means you're not just another person passing through. You're someone they've already decided matters. The key is learning to honor that. If you respect the space they give you, if you hold it with care and gratitude, you reinforce their belief that intimacy can be safe. But if you disregard, if you push too hard or demand more than they can give, you risk breaking the very trust they've struggled to extend. At the end of the day, because of love is not just about saying, I love you. It's about creating an environment where both people feel safe enough to be themselves. And when an avoidant creates that environment for you, that's not hesitation. That's commitment. That's love at its deepest level. So here's the truth to remember. If an avoidant is sharing their safe space with you, you're already standing in the center of their heart. Because only love, real love, can convince them that letting you in is worth the risk. When it comes to avoidance, one of the most important truths to understand is this: don't listen only to what they say. Watch what they do. Because an avoidant in love will not always express it through words. They may not give you the constant verbal reassurance you crave, but if you pay attention, their actions tell the story their words cannot. And often, those actions reveal more about their heart than any "I love you" ever could. Avoidants have learned to be cautious with language. Words feel risky to them. Words create expectations, and expectations create pressure. So while they may hold back from declaring their feelings outright, their behavior begins to shift in ways they cannot hide. They might not tell you, "I miss you," but notice how they keep showing up at the right times. They might not say, "I care," but pay attention to the little things they do to make your life easier, to protect you, to quietly make sure you're okay. That's love. That's them communicating through consistency of action rather than extravagance of speech. Here's why this matters. Love is not defined by language alone. In fact, some of the deepest love in human history has been expressed without words. A look, a gesture, a sacrifice, these carry a weight far beyond language. And for the avoidant whose instinct is to guard vulnerability, action becomes their safest form of expression. It allows them to love you without exposing themselves too quickly. It's their way of saying, I'm here. I may not have the courage to say it yet, but I'll prove it to you. Think about the psychology behind this. Avoidants grew up learning that words can be unreliable. They've seen promises broken, trust shattered, commitments abandoned. So naturally, they don't put much faith in declarations. Instead, they test love through demonstration. If they're walking you to your car, if they're checking in to see if you've eaten, if they're remembering the smallest details about what matters to you, that's not casual attention. That's evidence of care. That's their version of devotion. Let me put it this way, for many avoidants, action is safer than admission. But don't mistake safety for indifference. Safety is simply their starting point. And the fact that they're taking consistent actions for you, even when it goes against their natural instinct to retreat, is a sign that they've already crossed the line into emotional commitment. And here's the interesting paradox: because they are so cautious with words, their actions often carry even more weight. If someone who talks about love all the time buys you dinner, it might not mean much. But if an avoidant, someone who avoids vulnerability, takes time out of their day to make sure you're cared for, that action speaks volumes. Because it's like a whisper that becomes a shout when you know how rare it is for them. Now, some of you might struggle with this because maybe you're wired differently. Maybe you value verbal affirmation. Maybe you think, if they really love me, they would just say it. But remember, this love is not about demanding in the form you prefer. Love is about recognizing it in the form it's being given. And when avoidant loves, they often give it through service, protection, and presence. You need to learn to see those subtle yet powerful gestures for what they are. Expressions of a heart that is terrified of loss but willing to risk anyway. Philosophically, this goes deeper. The ancient Greeks had many words for love. One of them, pragma, was about love that's proven committed, commitment, and responsibility. Not just fireworks, not just passion, but steady action over time. And that's exactly how avoidants reveal themselves. They don't rush to grand confessions. They prove themselves through small, consistent demonstrations. That's not weakness, it's wisdom. It's their way of saying, don't just listen to me, watch me. Because love is not what I say, it's what I do. So the next time you're trying to figure out if an avoidant cares about you, don't get lost in the silence of their words. Look instead at the volume of their actions. Notice how they protect you when you're vulnerable. Notice how they remember the little things you thought they'd forget. Notice how, even if they retreat, sometimes always come back. That pattern, returning, showing up, doing what matters, is the language of their heart. And here's the truth: actions will always tell you more than words. Because especially when those actions are coming from someone who's spent their whole life avoiding vulnerability. If they're acting out of love, it's because love has already taken root in them. They may not shout it from the rooftops, but they're living it in the way they show up for you. So never underestimate the power of action. For the avoidant, it's not a substitute for love, it is love. And if you can see that, if you can honor that, you'll understand that you're not waiting for them to fall in love. They already have. One of the clearest signs that an avoidant has fallen in love is when they begin breaking their own rules. Think about it. Avoidants survive by building boundaries, by keeping strict rules for how close people can get, how much time they'll give, how much energy they'll share. These rules are not casual. They're survival mechanisms carefully designed over years to keep them safe. And yet when love takes hold, you'll see them bending, even breaking those rules for you. This is where you see the transformation. The avoidant who once swore they'd never call first is suddenly the one reaching out. The one who claimed they needed space is suddenly willing to spend more time with you than with anyone else. The person who guarded their independence fiercely is now making compromises, adjusting schedules, and choosing you over solitude. That's not a small shift, that's monumental. That's love rewriting the rules they thought were non-negotiable. Why does this matter so much? Because human beings cling hardest to the rules that protect their wounds. And avoidants, more than anyone, have wounds around intimacy. They're rules. Don't get too close, don't rely on anyone, don't show weakness, or walls they believe keep them from pain. But when you see them step outside those boundaries, What you're really witnessing is courage. You're seeing them risk the very pain they've spent a lifetime avoiding. And no one takes that risk unless their heart is already deeply involved. This is the paradox of love. It forces us to go against ourselves. It pushes us beyond our comfort zone, beyond the habits and defenses we thought were unshakable. For the avoidant, this is especially true. They may not even understand why they're doing it. They may catch themselves wondering, why am I calling them first? Why am I choosing to stay when I'd normally pull away? That inner conflict is love in action. It's not logical, but it's real. Love isn't meant to be logical. It's meant to be transformative. Let's take this deeper. Philosophically, the greatest measure of love is sacrifice. Not in the sense of losing yourself, but in the sense of giving up old patterns, old fears, old limitations, because something greater calls you forward. For the avoidant, breaking their rules is the ultimate sacrifice. It's them surrendering the safety of their old identity in exchange for connection with you. And that exchange is never casual. It's sacred. Now, this doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. It's in the way they linger in conversation when before they would have cut it short. It's in the way they say yes to plans they would have once rejected. It's in the way they prioritize you in moments when solitude used to win. Don't miss those signs. Don't underestimate those choices, because for an avoidant, those are not small adjustments. Those are revolutions. And here's something important. When they break those rules for you, they're not just proving their love to you, they're proving it to themselves. They're rewriting their own story. They're discovering that intimacy doesn't have to mean suffocation, that connection doesn't have to mean loss, that letting someone in doesn't always end in betrayal. That's powerful. And you, by being the person they trust enough to break those rules for, are not just receiving their love, you're part of their healing. But with that comes responsibility, because when someone breaks their rules for you, you must treat it with care. Don't demand more than they can give in the moment. Don't dismiss the effort because it doesn't look like your version of love. Recognize it for what it is, their way of saying, I'm risking myself for you. I'm choosing you over my fear. That's the deepest form of commitment they know how to give. At the end of the day, love is not measured by how easy it feels. Love is measured by what we're willing to risk, what we're willing to give up, what we're willing to break through. For an avoidant, every broken rule is proof that love has already taken root in their heart. So here's what I want you to remember. If you see them calling first, if you see them choosing you over their solitude, if you see them stepping outside the boundaries they swore they'd never cross, don't question it, don't doubt it, but don't take it for granted. That's love, that's transformation. That's someone showing you in the most powerful way they know how that you matter more than their fear. And that's the truth you need to carry with you. When an avoidant breaks their own rules, it's not weakness. It's love speaking louder than fear. It's proof that you've already reached the deepest part of their heart.